In today's video, we are going to jump into count, Counta, and Countif, because I love to count. And if you're old enough to get that reference, I hope you enjoyed it. So when we take a look at count and Counta, their syntax is very, very similar, and what they do is almost identical with a slight twist. So let's take a look in more detail. The value, and whether you add one value or, well, up to 30 values, the syntax stays the same. Now, if you're adding one value, the likelihood is that you're going to be adding in a range or an area of cells. If you're adding in multiple values, you can add multiple areas, strings, numbers, really anything that you want to throw in there. It will count based on the formula that you use. So count counts how many cells contain numbers. Counta counts how many cells have some sort of contents in them, so that they're not blank. Whether they're strings, numbers, formulas, or even errors will show up in that count. With the values, you've got value 1, 2, all the way up to 30. All of them are separated by commas. Now in this example, they could be strings, ranges, numbers, empty strings, single cell references, anything that you like. With the count function, it's going to count how many of them are numbers. So you can see that we've referenced C2 to C5, an empty string, a single cell reference, a full string that's manually typed into the formula, and a number manually typed into the formula. And only 2 of them out of all of those cells and all of those references are numbers. So you can see that it's going to return 2 in that little pop-up above the equal sign. Now, with count A, it will return anything that is not blank. And we'll take a look at that in the live examples that we're going to take a look at. Countif is a little bit different. Countif intakes a range, which is the area of cells that you want to investigate, and a criterion. So does it match that criterion? Now Countif will return a number of how many cells in that range meet the criterion. So you can see in this example, here is the range where we've got a total of 20 cells in there and 17 of them are filled. So when we look at the Countif, it's also going to have a criterion. In this case, we're going to use greater than 10. And what we'll do is we'll take this into the live example so you can see how it all plays out. And I'll have an option for count, Counta, and Countif in there. So let's count some more. Great, let's take a look at some live examples. In looking at this, I have put a border around the range that we're going to use to make it obvious and easy to grab. Now, I've got some blank cells in there. I've got an error formula in there. I got some strings in there, some numbers in there, and it's all interspersed. So let's see what happens. Equals count, and it says the number of numeric values in a data set. So how many of them are numbers? Now let's add in the range that we want to use. And it's returning 7. And there's 7 numbers. Totally makes sense. Now let's take a look at Counta. Let's go back a step there. The number of values in a data set. So it doesn't care whether it's a string or a formula or an error or a number. It's just any value that shows up in there. And if we look here, I believe this is 14. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Perfect. Exactly what we were looking for. Now, Countif gets a little tricky. So if we do equals Countif, and it says a conditional count across a range. So we input the range first, and then the criterion. So currently there's no criterion, therefore it will be 0. Now, if we do a cell reference like greater than 10 up here with F2, it's going to return 5. Now that'll be any number that's greater than 10. Since there were 7 numbers and 2 of them are 10, greater than 10 would return 5. Now you could change this very easily and do less than 20 and you're going to end up with 2. You could also change this to be a string. So this could be Doris. Let's see how many times Doris shows up is 3. Now, if you were to write this into the formula, the one thing to remember is that this has to be a string for it to work. So if I put in how many of them are 10, it's going to return 2. But if I said how many of them are greater than 10, it's going to return an error because it doesn't understand how to parse that as a logical expression. Now, if you wanted to alter this, you could wrap the greater than in quotes and then use an ampersand, and it will join those two together to create the greater than 10, and it would be 5. You can do all sorts of things in there. We'll get into things like regular expressions and more difficult ways to do counts in a future episode. But now you can count how often things show up in your spreadsheet. We'll see you in the next lesson. Like and subscribe if you learned something. And remember, anything worth doing well is worth doing badly first.